What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be learning everything that you need to know about fat in only 12 minutes. Not only how much fat do you need to be consuming, but at the same time, some of the important functions that nobody really tells you about. Also, the differences that exist between dietary fats and body fats, and some common myths that you also find about this essential macronutrient. Check it out. Let's go. Today you're going to be talking about a few different things as far as like fats, because a lot of times that people don't understand this macronutrient very well, and sometimes they ask themselves, what is it and what is it for? So today we're going to break this down, and as usual, I like to always start off with the why. Why do we need to consume it, and why are fats important? The number one myth that typically has existed since the early 40s and 50s. The whole myth was the fact that if we gain weight or we gain fat, it's related to our fat consumption. So the amount of fat that we're consuming in our diet. That is a massive myth. The amount of fat that you're consuming, dietary fat, is not equal to body fat. They're actually complete different things. And a lot of times like people don't understand that distinction. They think that because I eat a lot of fat in my diet, I'm gaining a lot of fat from that, and it's not necessarily true. If that was true, advanced nutrition strategies like ketogenic diets would just technically have people completely obese. So fats are being vilified for years. Now, fat does not equal body fat, so let's make sure that we understand this. But I'm gonna explain to you why sometimes, again, like an excessive amount of fat in your diet can help you or can contribute to weight gain, and I'll explain that in just a second. But fat actually has many positive benefits, and I'm just going to break those down very quickly because I wanna make sure that you kind of get what you came in home for, to try to figure out how much fat you need to be consuming on a daily basis. Now, fat is an essential macronutrient. You need it. You need it for many different functions, such as, and not limited to, number one, building cell membranes. Basically, all your cells have this little like outer layer that allows things in or out, and billions of cells that you have in your body. So in order for you to have a good integrity of that muscle membrane or that cell membrane, you need to make sure you have fat. In fact, these little circles that you kind of see around in this little circle right here are going to be that membrane, and it's very important for you to have a good integrity of those. Second, nutrient transport. Things like vitamin D, for example, require fat to be consumed. Here's a really interesting examples of this. Let's say, for example, that you're consuming a salad, and that salad has a ton of vegetables in it. If that salad has absolutely no fat, the transportation of some of those micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, is going to be altered, and is not going to be as effective as if you, for example, were adding a little bit of olive oil into that salad, because fat actually drives nutrients through your gut. And it's very important for you to actually have that. What do you think, for example, vitamin D, if you've ever taken it, comes in little capsules. Sometimes it comes in tablets. In most cases, it comes in little capsules that have little oil in there, because they need fat to be transported. There are vitamins like fat-soluble vitamins that require fat for that purpose. Hormonal balance. This also goes to the females and to women actually watching this video. Of course, men, it's incorporated to that as well. But a lot of the hormones, specifically reproductive hormones in women, are actually affected by fat. When we lower fat too much, you can start to see changes in hormones, and not necessarily positive ones. So keep that in mind. It's a source of energy. Fat can also be broken down and oxidized as a source of energy for the body, not just carbohydrates. And it's actually a very efficient not efficient, but it's a really high yield energy source. Of course, it's not as efficient as carbohydrates because carbs are broken down a little bit easier. So just kind of keep that in mind. And it's also really a big contributor in blood clotting. So these are all things that a lot of times people don't understand why this is so important, yet now I'm giving them to you. So these are just like 5 functions of the many that I'm still haven't even covered here today. But I'm gonna make sure that I keep this simple today. So now we're gonna break this down into understanding what are the types of fats that you're consuming on a daily basis, and which ones are the ones you need to be staying away from. So number one, fats are split up into 2 different kinds of fats: saturated and unsaturated. Most saturated fats are coming from things that are most of the time coming from animal sources. So think about steaks and the skin from the meat and options like this. Those are gonna be mostly saturated fat. They're not necessarily bad for you, and though obviously the industry have kind of like taught you that they are bad for you, you just need to control how much you're consuming of it, especially when you're also consuming carbohydrates. Just keep that in mind. The second type, which is the one that we need to have more of, is going to be unsaturated sources, which are mostly coming from plants. Things like, for example, we have a combination of monounsaturated fats and polyunsaturated fats. Mono, and I have a little drawing in here of an avocado. That's a really good example of monounsaturated fat sources, and things like, for example, like nuts and seeds, with the exception of walnuts. And of course, things like olive oil. Now, polyunsaturated fats are going to be longer chains, or not necessarily longer chains, but they break down a little bit more. It's a little more difficult for us to break those down, but not necessarily as much as saturated fats. Now, most of those are going to come from things like vegetable oils, which are typically a little bit more processed than things that are more virgin, like olive oil, for example. So keep that in mind. We want to have more monounsaturated fats, a little bit less of poly, and then a little bit less of that of saturated fats when it comes down to that. So hopefully you're still with me on this one. Now we're gonna break this down into understanding the nutritional value and what is actually fats contributing to our diets and how much do we need to be consuming daily. Of course, it's gonna be very generalized because everybody is completely different. Here is why fat sometimes gets vilified and why sometimes people think that fat causes fat gain. 1 gram of dietary fat contains almost 9 calories. If you remember from the class that I did about protein, 1 gram of carbohydrates or protein contains only 4 calories. So when you take 100 grams of fat and you compare it to 100 grams of carbs, you multiply that 9, that gives you almost 1,000 calories coming from fat versus only 400, because 1 gram of carbs is about 4 calories coming from carbohydrates. So they're almost as double and a little bit more of caloric density per unit compared to carbohydrates or proteins. That's why sometimes eating a small amount, that's why if you have a tablespoon of olive oil, it's gonna be almost as much as far as like calorie intake as it would be, for example, a cup of rice. You see both things and you're like, oh, how in the world is that supposed to actually have as much calories as that? And that's exactly why, because there's a lot more density. You're packing a lot more calories into smaller spaces. So keep that in mind. This happens a lot in places like restaurants where they're using a lot of fat that is hidden, and sometimes even you go to like these healthier places, they're still cooking with oils or still cooking with fats because fats actually add a lot more texture and flavor to foods. So keep that in mind. Now, how much fat do you need? This is the part of it that you wanted to listen to. So make sure that you keep a pen and paper ready so you understand this. There's 2 ways that you can estimate how much fat you need to be consuming daily. Way number 1 is going to be based on the percentage of your total calorie intake. So let's say that in the video that you calculated your total calories, you calculated that you needed to be consuming 2,000 calories, just for the sake of this example. So we typically recommend in most diets that are not necessarily going to be advanced things like keto or stuff like that, we recommend anywhere between 25 to 40%. For me, I usually like to stay within the 25 to 30% range. So all I need to do is I take 2,000 calories, or the calorie that you obtain, and you multiply it by 25% or 0.25. That is going to give me a total of 500 calories out of those 2,000 that are going to be coming from fat. And I also know that 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories, so I just simply do a rule of 3, and that gives me 500 divided by 9, 55 grams of fat that I need to be consuming in my total overall macronutrient breakdown. Last week we calculated protein. Now you have your fat, and the rest of it, what we're gonna do is we're gonna factor in for carbohydrates. Now, the second option that you can do is you can make the adjustments based on your actual body weight. Here's the caveat. If you're a person that you consider yourself to be obese or overweight, or you have a little extra kind of fat that you're carrying around, I would suggest you either use lean mass or you also use your goal weight that you want to kind of get to. So let's say that you weigh 250 pounds and you want to weigh 150 pounds, try to use 150 pounds as the number to make these estimations. So in this case, for example, let's say I'm 170 pounds, so I take 170 and I multiply it times anywhere between 0.3 to 0.5. In my case, for example, that gives me closer to 50 to 85 grams of fat, depending on the situation and depending on the goals that I'm trying to reach. Usually when I'm in a maintenance level, I typically bring those up to 85. When I'm in a really fat loss mode, where I'm trying to like drop a little bit of extra fat, I usually lower my calories, and with that, I also lower my fat intake as far as that, but I usually don't ever go anywhere below like 60 to 55 grams, and that's still actually a pretty restricted fat intake when it comes down to my diet. And there you have it, friends. That's all I wanted to share with you guys today. I'm trying to keep this videos at no more than 10 to 12 minutes, but hopefully this lesson was helpful. Thank you so much for watching here today, guys. Stay safe, stay hydrated, take care.